A secret visit. The night air was crisp as Sarah Lawson stepped out of the sleek black car and onto the polished stone driveway of the Sterling Grand. The five-star hotel was a beacon of luxury, a testament to everything she had built with her own two hands. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and gold-accented decor made the grand lobby glow like a palace. But tonight, she wasn't here as the owner. She adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag and smoothed her simple navy blue dress, blending into the crowd of travelers arriving at the entrance. No chauffeur, no assistant, no designer heels. Just her, walking in like any ordinary guest. It was a test, one she never thought she'd have to take. She had spent years crafting this hotel into one of the best in the country, making sure every guest, no matter who they were, felt welcomed and valued. But whispers had reached her ears, stories of certain guests being treated differently, being looked down upon by the very staff she trusted. She needed to see it with her own eyes. Taking a deep breath, she walked through the grand entrance, the cool air conditioning washing over her as the massive glass doors slid open. And then it happened. The moment she stepped in, the friendly smiles that had greeted the guests before her vanished. The bellboys who had rushed to assist the wealthy couple ahead of her suddenly had other things to do. The front desk attendants who had been laughing and chatting mere seconds ago now stood stiff and uninterested. Sarah felt the shift immediately. She approached the front desk, where a young man in a tailored navy blue suit barely spared her a glance. His name had read Daniel. "Good evening," she said politely. "I'd like to book a room for the night." Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. His gaze traveled over her, head to toe, taking in the plain dress, the lack of expensive jewelry, the natural curls of her hair, things that apparently told him she wasn't the right kind of guest. He sighed. "Are you sure, ma'am? This is a luxury hotel. Rooms here start at $500 per night." Sarah's stomach twisted, but she kept her face neutral. "I'm aware of that. I'd still like to book a room." Daniel's expression remained blank. "We're fully booked." Sarah raised an eyebrow and glanced at the reservation screen he had been working on. A few open rooms flashed across the display. "I see available rooms on your system," she said, keeping her voice calm. Daniel quickly clicked something on the screen. "Ah, those are premium suites, and they require special reservations. And the deluxe rooms. Those are not available at the moment." Lies. Sarah inhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. She could have revealed herself right then and there, could have told him that she wasn't just a guest, she was the owner. That she could fire him in an instant. But she didn't. Not yet. She wanted to know how deep this ran. Instead, she smiled. "All right. I understand." Without another word, she turned and walked away from the front desk, feeling his dismissive gaze on her back. Her eyes scanned the lobby, watching as another guest, an older gentleman in a fine tailored suit, stepped up to the counter. "Welcome to the Sterling Grand, sir." Daniel's voice was suddenly bright and professional. "How may I assist you tonight?" Sarah clenched her jaw. So it wasn't about rooms being unavailable. It was about her not looking like the kind of guest he wanted to serve. She took a deep breath, her mind working. This was just the beginning. If this was how guests were being treated, she needed to find out how far the problem went. And she needed proof. The restaurant test. Sarah decided to try another part of the hotel, the restaurant. Maybe the front desk was just one bad apple. Maybe this wasn't a pattern. She made her way to the hotel's fine dining restaurant, La Reverie. The golden glow of chandeliers and the soft hum of conversation filled the space. She approached the hostess stand where a young woman with sleek blonde hair stood, flipping through a reservation book. "Good evening," Sarah said with a polite smile. "I'd like a table for one, please." The hostess barely glanced up. "Do you have a reservation?" "No, but I was hoping." "We're full," the woman cut in sharply, returning her focus to the book. Sarah peered past her into the restaurant. Several tables sat empty, white tablecloths perfectly arranged, glasses sparkling under the warm light. "Are you sure?" she asked, keeping her voice light. "I see a few open tables." The hostess finally looked at her, really looked at her, and Sarah saw the calculation in her gaze. It was the same look Daniel had given her at the front desk. Judgment. "Those tables are reserved," the hostess said, her lips curving into a fake, apologetic smile. "I'm afraid we can't accommodate you." Before Sarah could say another word, a couple approached the stand. A man in a suit and a woman draped in an expensive silk dress. "Good evening, sir, ma'am," the hostess beamed. "Welcome to La Reverie. Do you have a reservation?" "Actually, we don't," the man said. "Is there anything available?" "Of course. Right this way." She grabbed 2 menus and gestured toward an empty table. Sarah stared as they were seated without hesitation. Her stomach turned. So it wasn't about reservations. It wasn't about availability. It was her. She took a slow breath, her heart pounding with anger. But instead of snapping, she did what she had done at the front desk. She smiled. "Thank you," she said to the hostess, nodding once before turning and walking out of the restaurant. She wasn't done yet. Escalation. As she stepped into the grand lobby again, the air felt heavier, thicker. She was starting to piece it together. This wasn't just one rude employee. This was a culture, a mindset, and she needed to know how far it went. Just as she was about to head toward the elevator to explore the upper floors, she heard hurried footsteps behind her. "Ma'am, excuse me." She turned to find 2 uniformed security guards walking toward her. "Yes?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. One of them, a burly man with a clipped mustache, looked her up and down. "We've received a complaint about your presence in the hotel." Sarah blinked. "A complaint?" "Yes. We need you to leave the premises." Her breath caught. This was it. She had walked into her own hotel, asked for service like any other guest, and not only was she denied, she was being thrown out. Her hands curled into fists at her sides, anger buzzing under her skin. She could reveal herself right now, could watch their faces turn to panic when they realized their mistake. But no, not yet. Instead, she took a step back, plastered on a polite smile, and said, "All right, I'll leave." Then, as she walked toward the exit, she pulled out her phone and sent a single message to her assistant. "We have a problem." Sarah had seen enough. Now, it was time to fix it. And she wasn't going to be kind about it. Going undercover. Sarah stepped out of the Sterling Grand and into the cool night air, her mind racing. She had just been thrown out of her own hotel, dismissed as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. It wasn't just one bad employee. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was systemic. She had spent years building this business, pouring everything she had into making it a symbol of luxury and hospitality. And now she had undeniable proof that her own staff were treating guests differently based on appearances. She needed to see the full extent of the damage. And for that, she had to go undercover. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Rachel, her most trusted assistant. Rachel answered immediately, her voice laced with concern. "Sarah, what happened? What do you mean there's a problem? I need you to book me a room at the Sterling Grand under a different name," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "And I need you to do it now." Rachel hesitated. "Wait, what?" "I need to experience the hotel as a guest without anyone knowing who I am," Sarah continued. "Something's going on, Rachel. I was denied service at the front desk and refused a table at the restaurant. Then security came and removed me from the building." Rachel's sharp intake of breath was all the confirmation Sarah needed. "Oh, hell no," Rachel muttered. "Are you serious? They kicked you out?" Sarah exhaled slowly, forcing herself to remain level-headed. "I'm serious, and I need to see how deep this goes before I take action." Rachel's voice was tight with anger. You want a room under a fake name. I can do that. But Sarah, what if this is bigger than just a few bad employees? What if it's coming from management? That's exactly what I need to find out. A few minutes later, Rachel sent Sarah a confirmation. Reservation confirmed. Sophia James. 2 nights in a deluxe suite. It was time for round 2. A different welcome. Sarah changed into a new outfit, something slightly more polished but still simple. A fitted blazer, stylish flats, a sleek bag. Enough to make her look like a professional traveler rather than someone who didn't belong. She walked back into the hotel with her shoulders squared, head high. The same grand entrance. The same shimmering chandeliers. The same front desk. But this time, something was different. The moment she stepped forward and gave her alias, the front desk attendant, not Daniel, but a different employee, flashed her a dazzling smile. "Welcome to the Sterling Grand, Miss James. I see your reservation here. Let's get you checked in." Sarah kept her expression neutral. Same hotel, same rooms, but a different experience. In less than an hour, she had gone from being rejected and thrown out to being welcomed with open arms. All because she looked the part. As the receptionist handed her a keycard, Sarah noticed Daniel lingering near the back of the desk. When his eyes landed on her, he frowned slightly, clearly not recognizing her from before. She offered him a polite smile, her mind already spinning with questions. How many other guests had been turned away simply for not looking wealthy enough? And who had trained these employees to make those judgment calls? Sarah took the elevator up to her suite, already formulating her next move. Observing the hotel staff. The suite was immaculate, exactly as it should be. Plush bedding, marble countertops, a breathtaking view of the city skyline. But Sarah wasn't here to admire the luxury. She spent the next few hours exploring the hotel, quietly observing how other guests were treated. She noticed the little things. How the concierge eagerly greeted well-dressed guests but ignored others. How the staff at the restaurant subtly treated customers differently. Quick service for some, dismissive responses for others. And worst of all, how security seemed to patrol certain areas more closely when guests who didn't fit the mold were present. It was sickening. And it confirmed what she had feared. This wasn't just a handful of employees acting on their own biases. This was a culture, a toxic, deep-rooted issue. And she was going to burn it to the ground, uncovering a bigger problem. That night, Sarah sat in her suite, sipping a cup of tea and reviewing everything she had witnessed. Then her phone buzzed. Rachel, I found something. You're going to want to see this." Sarah immediately called her back. "What did you find?" she asked. Rachel took a breath. Guest complaints. Sarah's stomach tightened. "How bad?" "Bad." Rachel hesitated. "And weird. The complaints about discrimination. They don't exist in the official records." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What?" "There's a pattern," Rachel continued. "Guests who were mistreated, their complaints are gone. Deleted. The only complaints in the system are minor. Stuff about room service being slow or towels not being stocked. Nothing serious." Sarah's grip tightened on her phone. Someone was covering this up. And if complaints were being erased, that meant someone in management was involved. She took a slow breath, her mind racing. "Rachel, I need to find out who's behind this. I need to know who's erasing these complaints." "I had the same thought," Rachel said. "So I did some digging." Sarah leaned forward. "And the complaints aren't just being deleted. They're being redirected." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Redirected to where?" Rachel hesitated. "To a private email account. One that belongs to Mr. Adams." Sarah's stomach dropped. Mr. Adams, the head of guest relations, one of the most powerful managers in the entire hotel. And now, the prime suspect in a cover-up. Sarah exhaled slowly. "So he's the one hiding this." Rachel's voice was grim. "Looks like it. But I don't think he's working alone. Sarah's mind was already working on her next steps. She needed to confront Adams, but she couldn't go in without evidence. They needed to go deeper, find out just how many people were involved, and figure out who was allowing this to happen. Because one thing was clear, this wasn't just discrimination. This was corruption. And someone at the top was pulling the strings. Sarah stood, staring out the window at the city lights below. She had built this hotel from the ground up, and she wasn't about to let it be poisoned from the inside. Not without a fight. Setting the trap. Sarah sat in her luxury suite, the city skyline stretching out beyond the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. But instead of enjoying the breathtaking view, she was focused on something far more pressing. Her hotel, the business she had spent years building, was infected. Discrimination, corruption, cover-ups. And the man at the center of it all was Mr. Adams, the head of guest relations. She had spent the past 24 hours gathering evidence, watching how guests were treated, and speaking to employees who were too afraid to come forward. But she needed more. She needed proof. Real, undeniable proof that Adams wasn't just ignoring complaints. He was actively erasing them. And she had a plan. She grabbed her phone and dialed Rachel. "Tell me you've got something," Rachel answered without greeting. "I do," Sarah said. "And we're going to use it to set a trap." Rachel was silent for a moment, then let out a breath. "I like the sound of that. What's the plan?" Sarah smiled slightly. "We're going to file a fake guest complaint." Rachel immediately caught on. "You want to see if Adams erases it?" "Exactly," Sarah said. "We'll create a detailed complaint, one that's impossible to ignore. Then we'll watch and see if it mysteriously disappears like the others." Rachel hummed in approval. "Clever, but it has to be something big enough to force a reaction." Sarah thought for a moment, then smirked. "I'll be the guest." Rachel hesitated. "Wait, you mean Sophia James? Your alias?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "Tonight, I'm going to cause a scene. Not something crazy, just enough to draw attention. Then I'll go to the front desk and file an official complaint." Rachel was already on board. "And if it disappears, we'll have our proof that Adams is covering things up." Sarah nodded. "Exactly." Rachel exhaled. "Damn, Sarah, you're really not playing around." "No," Sarah said. "I'm not." Because this was her hotel, and she was going to take it back. The incident. Sarah waited until the hotel lobby was busy with guests checking in for the night. Then she set her plan in motion. She went down to the restaurant, La Reverie, where she had been refused a table the night before. This time, dressed as Sophia James, she was immediately seated at a prime location near the window. No hesitation, no questions. She ordered a meal, waiting until the restaurant became even more crowded before making her move. When her food arrived, she waved down the waiter. "Excuse me," she said, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "This isn't what I ordered." The waiter blinked, confused. "Oh, I'm so sorry, ma'am. I can get that fixed." Sarah shook her head, keeping her voice firm but composed. "No, I specifically ordered the grilled salmon. This is steak." The waiter stammered, clearly flustered. I'll fix it right away." "No need," Sarah said. "I'll handle this myself." She stood, picking up her plate and walking toward the front of the restaurant. The murmurs around the room grew louder as she placed the plate directly on the hostess stand. "This is unacceptable service," she said, her voice sharp. "I expect better from the Sterling Grand." The hostess, the same woman who had denied her a table the night before, looked completely thrown off. I'll be speaking to management," Sarah said curtly. "Right now." Then she turned and strode out of the restaurant, heading straight for the front desk. The official complaint. Daniel, the same front desk employee who had refused her service the night before, was standing behind the counter when Sarah approached. He straightened immediately, his expression polite. "Miss James, how can I help you?" Sarah placed her hands on the desk and leveled him with a cool gaze. "I'd like to file an official complaint about my service at the restaurant." Daniel's demeanor changed. His polite smile faltered. "Oh, of course, ma'am. Let me get the paperwork." A few moments later, he handed her a complaint form. Sarah filled it out carefully, making sure to include key details: wrong order, poor service, and the fact that she had been ignored when she first asked for assistance. She kept her accusations professional but firm. When she finished, she slid the form back across the desk. "I expect a response from management," she said. Daniel swallowed. "Of course, Miss James, we take all complaints very seriously." Sarah smiled. "Good." Then she turned and walked away. Now, all she had to do was wait. Caught in the act. The next morning, Sarah met Rachel in her suite. "Did the complaint get logged?" Sarah asked. Rachel opened her laptop, typing quickly. Then she frowned. "There's no record of it." Sarah leaned forward. "Nothing." Rachel shook her head. "It's gone." Sarah sat back, a satisfied smile tugging at her lips. They had him. Mr. Adams was actively erasing complaints to cover up the discrimination in the hotel. Now, all that was left was to confront him. But Sarah wasn't going to do it quietly. No, she was going to make sure everyone saw what he had done. And she had the perfect way to do it. The public exposure. Sarah sent an email to Mr. Adams that afternoon, requesting a private meeting. She knew he wouldn't refuse. After all, she was Sophia James, a wealthy guest who had filed a complaint. When she arrived at his office, Adams greeted her with a professional smile. "Miss James," he said smoothly, gesturing for her to sit. "I understand you had an issue at the restaurant. Let me assure you, we take guest satisfaction very seriously." Sarah smiled. "Oh, I know." Adams blinked. I'm sorry." Sarah leaned forward, her expression turning ice cold. "You deleted my complaint." Adams stiffened. I'm not sure what you mean." "Oh, I think you do," Sarah continued, her voice calm but deadly. "And so does everyone else." Before Adams could respond, the office door opened. Rachel walked in, followed by Robert, the hotel manager, and 2 senior board members. Adams' face drained of color. "Tell you, what is this?" he stammered. Sarah stood slowly, locking eyes with him. "This is your reckoning." Rachel stepped forward and placed a stack of documents on his desk. "Every complaint you've deleted, every instance of discrimination you've covered up, every lie you've told to protect yourself." Adam's mouth opened and closed, his hands shaking. You're fired," Sarah said, cutting him off. "Effective immediately, and if you try to fight it, I'll make sure every guest, every employee, every person in this industry knows exactly what you've done." Adam slumped back in his chair, defeated. He knew he was finished. Sarah turned to Robert and the board members. "We have a lot of work to do to clean this place up, and it starts now." Robert nodded, looking guilty. "Understood, Miss Lawson." Sarah took one last look at Adams before walking out of the office, her heart pounding with satisfaction. She had won this battle. But there was still one more enemy left. Because if Adams had been covering things up, someone even bigger had been pulling the strings, and Sarah was going to find them. No matter what it took. Unmasking the puppet master, Sarah had won the first battle. Mr. Adams was finished, exposed as a corrupt fraud who had been actively covering up discrimination and siphoning complaints out of the system. The confrontation had gone exactly as planned, and watching the color drain from his face as he realized his downfall was inevitable had been satisfying. But this was far from over, because Adams wasn't acting alone. Someone had been protecting him. Someone powerful. And Sarah wasn't going to stop until she found out who. A new trail. Rachel met Sarah in her office the morning after Adams was fired. There was no celebration, no relief, because the real fight had just begun. Rachel set her laptop down on Sarah's desk, her expression serious. I kept digging. You were right. Adams wasn't working alone. Sarah leaned forward. What did you find? Rachel clicked on a series of financial reports. At first, I thought Adams was the only one deleting complaints. But look at this. She pointed at a set of transaction records. There's a pattern, she continued. Every time a major complaint came in, one that could have seriously damaged the hotel's reputation, there was a corresponding payout. Sarah's stomach tightened. Payout. Rachel nodded. To certain employees, staff members who suddenly got bonuses after a discrimination complaint was erased. Sarah's pulse quickened. Are you saying someone was bribing employees to stay quiet? Rachel's jaw tightened. Not just employees. Guests too. Sarah sat back, stunned. This was deeper than she thought. Not only had Adams been covering up discrimination, but someone above him had been paying people off to keep quiet. How many payouts? Sarah asked. Rachel clicked through more files. Dozens. Over the past 5 years, almost $250,000 have been funneled into hush money payments. Sarah exhaled sharply. Someone had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars just to bury the truth. She leaned forward. Who authorized the payments? Rachel clicked again, her fingers tense against the keyboard. That's the tricky part. The money came from a private account. It wasn't directly linked to the hotel's payroll. Sarah frowned. So it wasn't an official expense. No, Rachel confirmed. Whoever is behind this was careful. The funds were wired in small amounts over time to avoid detection. But she hesitated. Sarah's eyes narrowed. But what? Rachel took a deep breath and turned the screen toward Sarah. There's one name that appears on multiple financial authorizations. Sarah's stomach clenched as she read the name. Mr. Thorne, one of the hotel's senior board members. One of the men who had mentored her when she first took over. A man she had trusted. Sarah slowly sat back in her chair, her hands tightening into fists. Thorne. So he was the one pulling the strings. A dangerous man. Mr. Thorne had been part of the Sterling Grand for over 2 decades. He was a well-respected businessman. He had powerful connections. He had always been polite, composed, and supportive of Sarah's vision for the hotel. But now she knew the truth. He had been silently orchestrating a culture of exclusion. He had been paying off complaints to keep his perfect reputation intact. And now she was going to expose him. But she had to be careful, because Thorne wasn't like Adams. Adams was sloppy. Thorne was dangerous, and if he suspected she was onto him, he would do whatever it took to protect himself. An unexpected warning. That evening, Sarah received a call from an unknown number. She debated answering, but something in her gut told her to pick up. She pressed the phone to her ear. Hello. A deep voice came through the speaker. You're making a mistake, Miss Lawson. Sarah's body went rigid. Who is this? A low chuckle. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you stop digging. Walk away now, and things will stay comfortable for you. Sarah's heart pounded. A threat. She clenched her jaw, gripping the phone tightly. If you're trying to scare me, it's not working. Another chuckle. Oh, but it should. You think you know what you're up against. You don't. Stay in your lane, little girl. You don't want to see what happens when you cross the wrong people. The line went dead. Sarah lowered the phone slowly, her hands shaking. That wasn't a warning. It was a promise. And now she knew one thing for certain. Thorne knew she was coming for him, and he was willing to fight back. But that was fine. Because Sarah wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Laying the trap. Sarah needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof that Thorne was behind the corruption. And she had an idea. The bribe payments had gone to employees and guests. That meant there were witnesses. She needed one of them to talk. And she had a feeling she knew exactly who to go after first. She called Rachel. I need you to find someone for me. Rachel didn't hesitate. Who? Sarah's eyes darkened. A guest who was paid off. Rachel immediately got to work, scouring records of previous guests who had left complaints, ones that had mysteriously vanished. After 2 hours, she found a name. Lena Carter. A former guest who had checked out early. A former guest who had received a suspicious $5,000 refund. And a former guest who, according to the notes in the system, had originally filed a discrimination complaint. "She's our key," Rachel said. "If she talks, we'll have Thorne cornered." Sarah nodded. "Then let's make sure she does." A dangerous meeting. Sarah arranged to meet Lena in a quiet cafe outside the hotel district. Lena was nervous, constantly glancing around as if she were being watched. When Sarah sat across from her, Lena leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you looking into this?" "Because I know what happened to you," Sarah said. "I know you filed a complaint. I know they paid you off. And I know Mr. Thorne is behind it." Lena stiffened. Sarah kept her voice calm. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to stop them. But I need your help." Lena swallowed, looking down at her hands. "They told me if I talked." She trailed off. Sarah reached across the table, her gaze steady. "They want you to be afraid. That's how they win. But if we expose them, they lose." Lena hesitated. Then, finally, she nodded. "I'll talk." Sarah exhaled. They finally had their witness. They finally had their proof. And now, it was time to bring Mr. Thorne down. For good. Closing in on Thorne. Lena Carter sat across from Sarah, her fingers tapping nervously against the ceramic cup in front of her. The small cafe was dimly lit, filled with the soft hum of conversation and the clinking of dishes. It was the kind of place where secrets could be exchanged without raising suspicion. Sarah leaned forward, keeping her voice steady. "Tell me everything, Lena. What happened during your stay at the Sterling Grand?" Lena swallowed, eyes darting to the cafe entrance before she spoke. I didn't think anyone would ever ask me that." She exhaled shakily. "I checked into the hotel 3 months ago for a business conference. Everything seemed fine at first. The hotel was beautiful. The service was great. But then, something happened." Sarah remained silent, letting Lena gather her thoughts. "One night, I ordered room service," Lena continued. "But when the food arrived, the server barely looked at me. He was cold. Dismissive. He set the tray down like I wasn't even worth his time." Sarah's stomach tightened. The pattern was all too familiar. Lena hesitated before continuing. "I brushed it off. But the next morning, I went downstairs to the front desk to request a later checkout. The man behind the desk barely acknowledged me. He refused to look up my reservation, told me they don't offer extensions for guests like me." Sarah clenched her jaw. Guests like me. She had heard those words before. "I tried to argue," Lena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But then security showed up. They escorted me out like I was some kind of criminal. I was humiliated." Sarah felt a familiar rage build in her chest. The same treatment she had faced. Lena had faced it too. Lena looked up, her eyes filled with anger. "I filed a complaint that night. I demanded answers. The next morning, I got a call from Mr. Adams." Sarah's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "And what did he say?" "He offered me money." Lena let out a bitter laugh. $5,000. He said it was an apology gesture from the hotel. But the moment I accepted it, my complaint disappeared. No record of it. No follow-up. Nothing. Sarah exhaled slowly. "And you're sure it was Adams who called?" Lena nodded. "At first, I thought he was just a manager trying to smooth things over. But then I did some digging of my own. I overheard 2 employees whispering about a special list of guests. People who didn't fit the hotel's luxury image. People like me." Sarah's blood turned ice cold. "A list." She leaned in. "Did you ever find out who created the list?" Lena hesitated before whispering one name. "Mr. Thorne." Sarah's heart pounded. Now it was confirmed. Thorne hadn't just been covering up discrimination. He had been orchestrating it, and he had been doing it for years. The mastermind exposed. Sarah stood in her office later that night, staring at the evidence laid out in front of her. The erased complaints, the financial records showing payoffs, Lena's testimony. It all pointed to one man, Mr. Thorne. He had been silently controlling the Sterling Grand from the shadows, deciding who was welcome and who wasn't, erasing complaints, paying off guests, covering his tracks. He had been playing a long game, and he had almost gotten away with it. Sarah picked up her phone and called Rachel. "We have everything we need," she said. Rachel's voice was sharp with anticipation. "Then it's time to take him down." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "No more warnings. No more games. Tomorrow, we confront him." The confrontation. Sarah didn't call for a meeting. She didn't ask to speak with Thorne privately. Instead, she walked into the next board meeting like a storm. The grand conference room was filled with executives, each one seated in leather chairs around a massive glass table. The mood was casual until Sarah stepped inside. Every conversation stopped. All eyes turned to her. Mr. Thorne sat at the head of the table, his silver hair neatly combed, his face unreadable. "Miss Lawson," he said smoothly, leaning back. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" Sarah set a folder down on the table. Thorne raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" Sarah's voice was ice. "Evidence." A murmur rippled through the room. Sarah flipped the folder open, revealing the financial records, the erased complaints, the bribes. She looked directly at Thorne. "I know everything." Silence. Then Thorne smirked. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Then let me refresh your memory." She pulled out a recording device and hit play. Lena's voice filled the room. "I overheard 2 employees whispering about a special list of guests. People who didn't fit the hotel's luxury image. People like me. Did you ever find out who created the list?" "Mr. Thorne." Thorne's smirk vanished. His fingers tightened around the armrest of his chair. One of the other board members, Mr. Patel, cleared his throat. "Thorne, what is she talking about?" Another member, Ms. Hastings, frowned. "A list? You mean to tell me there was targeted discrimination at this hotel?" Sarah leaned forward. "Not just discrimination. Corruption, payoffs, threats, and all of it covered up by the man sitting at the head of this table." The room filled with hushed whispers. Thorne slowly stood. "You don't have proof." Sarah smiled. "Actually, I do." She turned to the conference room door. Lena stepped inside. Thorne's face drained of color. Lena lifted her chin. "I was one of your victims," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm not staying silent anymore." Sarah folded her arms. "Shall I continue? Because I have an entire stack of testimonies just like hers." Thorne's jaw clenched. For the first time, the board members were looking at him not with respect, but disgust. One by one, their gazes turned to Sarah. Ms. Hastings spoke first. "Miss Lawson, what are you suggesting we do?" Sarah's voice was calm. "Remove him from this company. Immediately." Thorne's chair scraped against the floor as he turned to the board. "You can't be serious." Mr. Patel cut him off. "After this, you're lucky if we don't file a lawsuit." Thorne's face turned red with rage. "I built this hotel." Sarah smiled. "No, I built this hotel. You just poisoned it." Thorne glared at her, but he knew it was over. One by one, the board members voted him out. When the final vote was cast, Thorne slammed his hands on the table. "This isn't over," he hissed at Sarah. She met his glare, unflinching. "Oh, yes, it is," she said. "Now get out of my hotel." Security entered moments later, escorting Thorne out. And just like that, the poison was gone, taking back the Sterling Grand. As Thorne disappeared through the doors, Sarah turned back to the board. "This hotel will be better," she promised. We will welcome everyone. No more bias. No more corruption. No more secrecy. The board members nodded. Sarah exhaled. It was over. She had taken back her hotel, and she would make sure that no guest, ever again, felt unwelcome in her Sterling Grand. Rebuilding from the ashes. The echo of Mr. Thorne's footsteps faded as security escorted him out of the boardroom. For the first time, in a long time, Sarah felt like she could breathe. She had won. The man who had poisoned the Sterling Grand with discrimination and corruption was gone. But the battle wasn't over. Because now, she had to fix what he had broken. And that was going to be the hardest part of all. The aftermath of a scandal. News of Thorne's dismissal spread through the hotel like wildfire. Some staff members looked relieved. Others were shocked. A few were angry, likely because they had benefited from his system. But Sarah didn't care about their opinions. She cared about one thing only: restoring trust. She walked through the halls, watching the employees closely. There was a noticeable tension in the air. Some staff members avoided her gaze. Others murmured to each other when she passed by. She knew what they were thinking. What happens now? The Sterling Grand had built its reputation on exclusivity, a place where the elite thrived, where status mattered. But Sarah wasn't interested in exclusivity. She was interested in excellence. And excellence had nothing to do with a person's wealth, appearance, or background. So she gathered the employees, and she told them exactly that. A message to the staff. The grand ballroom, usually reserved for lavish galas, was now filled with staff members. Every waiter, concierge, housekeeper, and manager stood shoulder to shoulder, murmuring among themselves. Sarah stepped onto the stage, scanning the crowd. Then she took a deep breath. "I built this hotel because I believed in hospitality," she began. True hospitality, the kind that makes every guest feel valued, respected, and welcome. The murmuring faded. She continued, "But somewhere along the way, we lost that. Some of you have seen it firsthand. Some of you have even been a part of it." Silence. She wasn't sugarcoating it. We failed our guests, and because of that, we failed ourselves. A few heads lowered. Sarah's voice softened. "But we can fix it, together." She looked out at the crowd, making eye contact with as many employees as she could. This isn't about firing people. This isn't about placing blame. This is about starting over. A quiet ripple of surprise moved through the room. Because they had all expected punishment. Instead, she was offering them a chance. "We are going to become the best hotel in the country," she declared. "Not because we cater to the wealthy, but because we treat every guest like royalty." A few murmurs of agreement. Sarah stepped forward. "But that means change. And if you can't stand by that change, then you don't belong here." Silence. Then, after a long pause, someone started clapping. Sarah turned. It was Robert, the hotel manager. Then Rachel joined, and one by one, the employees followed. The sound of applause grew louder. Sarah felt something shift in the air. They were with her, and for the first time, the Sterling Grand had a future worth believing in. Cleaning house. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about the changes. The next morning, Sarah received 6 resignation letters. Most were from upper management, the ones who had quietly benefited from Thorne's system. Good. She didn't need them. She personally called each department head and instructed them to start hiring new, diverse, talented staff. But she didn't stop there. She restructured training programs. She created strict policies that made discrimination impossible to hide. She even set up an anonymous reporting system, where employees and guests could file complaints without fear. She left no room for corruption to take root again. And just like that, the old Sterling Grand ceased to exist, and a new era began. Rebuilding reputation. Of course, the public had questions. The news of Thorne's firing had spread, and journalists were circling. Sarah knew she had to get ahead of the narrative. So she did something no one expected. She held a press conference, facing the media. The conference hall was packed with reporters, cameras flashing as Sarah stepped up to the podium. She wasn't nervous. She was ready. A journalist stood first. "Miss Lawson, is it true that the Sterling Grand was involved in a discrimination scandal?" Sarah met his gaze. Yes. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. No denial. No cover-up. Just the truth. "And is it true that you fired several staff members in response?" Another reporter asked. Sarah nodded. "I removed people who did not represent our values. People who forgot what hospitality truly means." More murmurs. A third reporter leaned forward. "And what will change going forward?" Sarah straightened. "This hotel will no longer be a place where people are judged by their appearance or status. It will be a place where every guest matters." Flashes of cameras. Pens scribbling on notepads. Sarah continued. "We are making permanent changes, new hiring policies, new training programs, and most importantly, accountability." The press conference lasted over an hour. By the time it ended, the narrative had shifted. Sarah hadn't just fired corrupt staff. She had rebuilt a better hotel, and the public respected her for it. The grand reopening. 6 months later, the Sterling Grand reopened under its new philosophy, and something amazing happened. Guests started coming back. Not just the wealthy elite. Everyone. Families, travelers, honeymooners, business professionals. People who had once felt unwelcome were now treated like royalty. Sarah walked through the hotel one evening, watching as staff greeted guests with genuine warmth. She saw a concierge helping an elderly couple find their way. She saw a front desk agent chatting with a family from out of town. She saw waiters serving every guest with the same respect, regardless of what they were wearing. It was working. They had done it. She turned to Rachel, who stood beside her with a proud smile. "You rebuilt this place," Rachel said. "Not just the hotel, the culture." Sarah smiled. "We did it together." She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. Her hotel was finally what she had always dreamed it would be. A place where everyone belonged. A place where everyone was treated with dignity. A place where she was proud to be the owner. The Sterling Grand wasn't just back. It was better than ever. And Sarah Lawson, she wasn't just a successful hotel owner. She was a leader who had changed the game forever. A new beginning. The Sterling Grand was thriving. After months of rebuilding, retraining, and redefining hospitality, the hotel had transformed from a place of quiet exclusion to a beacon of true luxury, one that welcomed everyone. Sarah walked through the grand lobby one evening, watching the results of her efforts unfold before her. A well-dressed businessman checked in at the front desk, receiving the same warm greeting as a young woman in casual jeans and a hoodie. A family of tourists, wearing budget-friendly outfits, were escorted to their suite with the same level of service as a VIP guest. In the restaurant, a waiter smiled as he served an elderly woman dining alone, giving her the same attention he would to a wealthy couple. It was happening. Real change. No more bias. No more hidden discrimination. Just pure hospitality, the way it should be. Sarah should have been happy. And she was. But something was missing. Something she couldn't quite put into words. And she was about to find out exactly what it was. An unexpected invitation. Late one evening, Sarah was in her office, reviewing upcoming bookings and staff reports, when her phone buzzed. It was an email. But not just any email. It was from the International Hospitality Council. Her eyebrows lifted as she read the subject line. Invitation to the Global Hospitality Awards Gala. Nomination for Hotel Innovator of the Year. Sarah's breath caught. She clicked the email, her hands slightly trembling. Dear Miss Lawson, we are pleased to inform you that you have been nominated for the prestigious Hotel Innovator of the Year Award, recognizing excellence in leadership and groundbreaking contributions to the hospitality industry. Your work at the Sterling Grand has set a new standard, and we would be honored to have you attend this year's gala in London." Sarah blinked. She reread the words. She had been nominated. Her. The woman who had been kicked out of her own hotel just months ago. The woman who had been underestimated. The woman who had fought tooth and nail to change the system. She exhaled, setting her phone down. It wasn't just about the award. It was about recognition. For her hotel, for the changes she had made. Rachel walked in just as Sarah leaned back in her chair. "What's with that face?" Rachel asked, plopping down into the chair across from her. Sarah turned her screen around. Rachel squinted at the email. Then her eyes widened. "No freaking way." Sarah grinned. "Oh, it's real." Rachel let out a scream. "Sarah, this is huge." Sarah chuckled. I know." Rachel practically jumped out of her seat. "Girl, this isn't just huge. This is game-changing. Do you know how many hoteliers dream of being nominated for this? You're going to be at a gala with CEOs of 5-star hotel chains. This is elite-level recognition." Sarah nodded slowly. "Yeah, it is." Rachel frowned at her. "Why don't you seem excited?" Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's not that I'm not excited," she admitted. "It's just, what if I don't win? What if I go all the way to London, and it's just a nice dinner and a handshake?" Rachel scoffed. "Sarah, you don't need a trophy to prove what you've done. Look around you. This hotel is thriving. You changed lives. You already won." Sarah exhaled. Rachel was right. And still, she wanted to go. Not just for the award, but because something told her that this trip would change everything. London calling. A month later, Sarah found herself standing in the heart of London, gazing up at the historic Mayfair Grand Ballroom, where the gala was being held. The streets were alive with the hum of conversation and the glow of city lights. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Photographers and journalists crowded near the entrance, snapping photos of attendees in dazzling gowns and tailored tuxedos. Sarah inhaled sharply. She belonged here. Not because of the designer dress she wore. Not because of the nomination. But because she had earned her place. As she stepped onto the red carpet, Rachel, who had insisted on flying out with her, walked beside her, grinning. "Look at you," Rachel teased. "From being thrown out of your own hotel to walking the red carpet. If that's not a glow-up, I don't know what is." Sarah chuckled. "You love reminding me of that, don't you?" Rachel winked. "I do. Keeps you humble." Inside the ballroom, chandeliers glittered overhead as the world's top hotel executives, designers, and innovators mingled over cocktails and whispered about business deals. Sarah scanned the room, recognizing faces she had only ever seen in business magazines. This was another level, and she was here. As the evening progressed, dinner was served, speeches were made, and one by one, awards were handed out. Then, finally, the moment she had been waiting for. The host stepped up to the microphone. And now, the award for Hotel Innovator of the Year, a recognition of bold leadership and transformative impact in the hospitality industry. Sarah felt her heartbeat thunder in her chest. The host smiled. And the winner is... A pause. A long, agonizing pause. Then, Sarah Lawson, owner of the Sterling Grand. For a second, Sarah froze. Then the applause hit her like a wave. Rachel grabbed her arm. "Go, that's you." Sarah stood, still in shock. She made her way to the stage, past tables filled with industry giants, some of whom she had once admired from afar. Now, they were applauding her. As she accepted the award, she took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. She looked out at the sea of faces. Then she smiled. And she told them the story. The story of how she had walked into her own hotel as a guest and had been thrown out. The story of how she had discovered the truth. The story of how she had fought to change it. And as she finished, she looked directly at the audience and said, "Hospitality isn't about luxury. It isn't about wealth. It's about making people feel like they belong." The room was silent for a moment. Then, applause. Loud, thunderous, a standing ovation. And Sarah, she felt something settle inside her. Not just pride, peace. Because this was her legacy. And she was just getting started. Final epilogue. 1 year later, a year after Sarah's win, the Sterling Grand became one of the top-rated luxury hotels in the world. Sarah expanded her brand, opening new hotels based on the same philosophy. Guests flocked to them. And competitors, they started to change their own policies, because Sarah hadn't just changed one hotel. She had changed the industry, one guest at a time. And as she stood on the balcony of her newest hotel, overlooking the city that once doubted her, she smiled, because she had proven them all wrong. And she had done it her way.